For 15 years, Helena Marsh had not walked into a room. She had been carried into it, wheeled into it, or, on her better days, guided into it by the motorized chair that had become, in the eyes of every person who worked for Caldwell Capital, simply an extension of who she was. Not that anyone dared say that out loud. Helena ran the most aggressive mid-market private equity firm in the Mid-Atlantic corridor from a corner office on the 22nd floor of a glass building in downtown Baltimore. She had built Caldwell Capital from 11 employees and a leased conference room into a 200-person operation with $4 billion under management, and she had done all of it from that chair. The chair was black. The wheels were custom. And Helena Marsh, at 41, was still the most feared person in any room she entered, regardless of how she got there. The accident had happened in the winter of her 26th year, on a patch of black ice outside a parking garage in Philadelphia. She had been a junior analyst then, running numbers at midnight, barely sleeping, barely eating, barely living anything that resembled a life. The impact had left her with what 3 different spinal specialists described as a partial cervical compression, technically incomplete, technically improvable, practically devastating. She had regained some sensation in her arms over the following year. Her legs had simply stopped cooperating. 15 years, 47 specialists, 3 surgeries, 2 of which she regretted, 11 rounds of physical therapy. And one man, Dr. Conrad Sloan, her chief medical advisor and the architect of her ongoing treatment protocol, who had, for the better part of a decade, convinced her that the ceiling had been reached, that this was as good as it would get, that the human body had limits, and hers had simply found them early. She had believed him. What choice did she have? He was the expert. He had the credentials. He had the quiet authority of a man who had never once been wrong, or at least had never once admitted it. What Helena did not know, on the morning that a plumber's van pulled into the parking garage beneath Caldwell Capital, was that Conrad Sloan had been wrong about almost everything, and that the man who would figure that out was not a doctor. He was not a researcher. He was not affiliated with any hospital or university or clinical trial. His name was Pete Decker. He was 38 years old. He drove a white van with a cracked passenger mirror, showed up 20 minutes early to every job, and had a 7-year-old daughter named Lucy, who drew dinosaurs on the back of his work invoices. He was there to fix a leak in the executive floor bathroom. Pete had been doing commercial plumbing in Baltimore for 11 years, and in that time he had learned 2 things with absolute certainty. First, that the pipes in glass office buildings from the early 2000s were almost always installed wrong and would eventually admit it. And second, that the people who worked in Fix Anything at all. He was used to being invisible. He did not take it personally. The service elevator let him out on 22, and he followed the building super, a heavyset man named Gerald who smelled of coffee and moved with the careful energy of someone who had survived many difficult bosses, down a carpeted hallway to the executive restroom adjacent to the corner suite. "Fast as you can," Gerald said. "She hates disruptions." "Who does?" Gerald looked at him the way people look at someone who is asked what the sun is. "Mrs. Marsh." Pete nodded and got to work. He was under the sink cabinet 20 minutes later, replacing a corroded supply line, when he heard the door to the adjacent office open and then close with the particular soft pressure of a motorized wheelchair crossing a threshold. He heard voices. He was not trying to listen. The bathroom door was ajar, and voices carry through drywall in ways architects never quite account for. "The Hendricks portfolio needs to go before the board Thursday," Helena's voice said. It was the voice of someone who had not softened anything in a long time. "You'll have the deck by morning." A man's voice, measured, professional. "I'll have it by tonight, Douglas. Tonight." A pause. Then, "Of course." The chair moved. Papers shifted. Then the other voice again, lower, closer to the wall. "Your 11 o'clock is here. It's Dr. Sloan. Tell him 3 minutes." Pete kept working. He heard the wheelchair move again. He heard a cabinet open on the other side of the wall. And then, because the building had terrible acoustics and Gerald had left the bathroom door 2 inches open, he heard a sound he recognized immediately, the mechanical click and torque of a back brace being adjusted. He had heard that sound before. His ex-wife, Renee, had worn one for 8 months after a car accident. He knew the tension dial. He knew the particular pitch of the ratchet. He also knew, from the sound of it, that whoever was adjusting that brace was cranking it the wrong direction. He stopped moving. He lay under the sink cabinet and listened. The ratcheting continued. 2 clicks. 3. The kind of compression that would push a thoracic support pad directly into the mid-cervical junction if the wearer was seated at a forward angle. He had spent 8 months watching Renee's physical therapist scold him for adjusting it wrong. He knew what wrong sounded like. He did not say anything. It was not his place. He was there for the pipes. He finished the supply line. He replaced the access panel. He collected his tools, wrote the work order, and left the executive floor. In the elevator going down, he thought about what he had heard and told himself to let it go. He let it go for about 4 days. What brought it back was Lucy. They were eating cereal on a Saturday morning, the good kind with the marshmallows that Lucy had negotiated for after 3 weeks of making her bed without being asked, and she was showing him a drawing she'd made at school. It was a woman in a wheelchair. The teacher had read the class a picture book about a Paralympic athlete, and Lucy had drawn the woman with very large arms and a small, determined face. "She won," Lucy said. "I can see that, because she kept trying even when everyone said she couldn't." Pete looked at the drawing for a long moment. Then he looked at his daughter. Then he thought about the ratchet sound and the angle of compression and the woman on the 22nd floor who had not walked in 15 years. He thought, what if someone has been cranking the brace wrong this entire time? He knew it was probably nothing. He knew he was a plumber and not a physical therapist. He knew that the woman upstairs had access to the finest medical minds in the region and that none of them had missed anything obvious. But he also knew what that sound had sounded like. On Monday, he called the building manager and asked about the executive floor service schedule. There was a quarterly inspection on the kitchen plumbing in 3 weeks. Pete volunteered for it. Helena noticed him on the second visit because he was early. She had an internal policy, not written anywhere, simply understood, that no service personnel were to be in the executive suite before 8:30 in the morning. It was 6:55 when she came out of her office and found a man in a gray work shirt crouched in the kitchen alcove with a flashlight and a notepad, writing something down with the concentration of a man solving a proof. "Who cleared you to be up here?" she said. Pete looked up. He did not appear startled, gestured. 6:30 slot. The dishwasher fitting's been leaking into the subfloor. I wanted to check the extent before pulling the unit. It's not 6:30 anymore. It's almost 7. I know. I got here at 6:15. He paused. The tile under the unit has some soft spots. You'll want to know about that before it gets worse. Helena looked at him for a moment. Fine. She moved past him toward the coffee machine. He went back to his notepad. She poured her coffee. She could feel, as she always could feel in the first hour of the day, the particular pressure of the brace against her lower neck, the stiffness that Dr. Sloan had told her was normal, expected, the natural result of the nerve compression. She had learned to ignore it, the way you learn to ignore a sound that has always been there. "How long has the pressure felt worse in the morning?" Pete said. She turned. He had not looked up from his notepad. "I didn't say anything about pressure. You made a face when you reached for the mug, left side, like something was pinching." The silence in the kitchen was very complete. "You're observant for a plumber," she said. "My ex-wife wore a TLSO brace for 8 months. I watched her make that face every morning until her PT adjusted the mid-thoracic pad 2 millimeters to the right." He looked up then. "I'm not trying to overstep. I heard the adjustment the other week through the wall. The tension was running opposite to the primary support axis. For someone with forward cervical lean in a seated position, that would create consistent pressure on the stop." Helena set her mug down. "You heard me adjusting my brace through a bathroom wall, and now you're giving me a biomechanical assessment?" "No," Pete said. "I'm telling you what I heard. What you do with it is your business." She stared at him. He had the look of a man who had said his piece and genuinely did not care what happened next. What's your name? She said. Pete Decker. Do you have any medical training, Pete Decker? No. Any physical therapy certification? No. Any reason I should take medical input from a plumber who was trespassing in my kitchen at 6:15 in the morning? I was cleared by Gerald. That's not what I asked. Pete closed his notepad. He stood up, which made him taller than she had realized. No reason at all, he said. I'll have the report on the subfloor to Gerald by end of day. He left. Helena sat in her chair for a long time after that. She drank her coffee. She thought about the pressure on her left side, which she had been ignoring for approximately 7 months. She picked up her phone and called Dr. Sloane's office. The protocol is working exactly as intended, Sloane told her the following afternoon. He had the smooth, unhurried delivery of a man for whom doubt was an inconvenience other people experienced. What you're feeling is the natural progression of the nerve recovery process. Discomfort is not malfunction. I want the brace recalibrated. Helena. A small pause, tolerant and slightly parental. We calibrated it 6 weeks ago. The settings are specifically designed for your cervical profile. I want a second opinion on the settings. The pause this time was longer. Of course, I can refer you to Dr. Patel at Hopkins. She'll tell you the same thing. I'd like the referral. Another pause. Then, smoothly, I'll have my office send the file. He did. 3 weeks later, Helena sat across from Dr. Anita Patel in a bright examination room at Johns Hopkins and watched the woman's face go very still as she reviewed the calibration chart. Who set these parameters? Dr. Patel asked. My physician, Dr. Conrad Sloane. How long have you been wearing this configuration? He adjusts it quarterly. I've been in this brace for approximately 4 years. Dr. Patel set the chart down. She did it carefully, the way you set something down when you need a moment before speaking. Mrs. Marsh, she said, the posterior support tension in this brace has been set at a compression angle that is not optimal for your injury profile. For someone with an incomplete C5-C6 lesion in a seated position, this configuration is actively counteracting the decompression work we'd want this brace to support. She paused. I'd like to do a full imaging series and have our spinal rehabilitation team review your history. Helena heard the words. She processed them one at a time. How long has it been set this way? I can only speak to what I'm seeing today, but the wear patterns on the brace suggest some time. Helena looked out the window. Baltimore was gray and flat and very far below. Could this have affected my recovery? Dr. Patel was quiet for a moment. Then she said carefully, I think there are things we should try before making any conclusions. The imaging was done that week. The rehabilitation team met the following Thursday. Helena sat at the end of a conference table that felt nothing like her conference tables. Everything softer, less decisive, full of people who used phrases like we believe and there may be potential. And listened to a physiatrist named Dr. Warren outline what 4 years of incorrect bracing might have done to the muscles and connective tissue that had been attempting, quietly and without anyone's knowledge, to do the work of healing. The good news, Dr. Warren said, is that the underlying nerve pathway damage is less extensive than previous imaging suggested. We believe some of what's been interpreted as permanent loss may be a product of chronic compression and muscular atrophy from the positioning. Helena looked at him for a long time. You're telling me it may not be permanent. I'm telling you that we don't know until we try. And I think we should try. She called Conrad Sloane that evening. He answered on the second ring, which told her he had been expecting the call. Hopkins has questions about my brace calibration, she said. I heard you'd made an appointment. His voice was measured, careful in a new way. They believe the configuration has been actively counterproductive for an unknown period of time. A silence. Every treatment approach has trade-offs. The protocol I've designed, Conrad. She said his name the way she said the names of people who had just done something that could not be undone. I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to understand that I am not asking as a patient. I'm asking as the person who sits on the board of the Caldwell Foundation, which funds 3 of the research initiatives your clinic operates under. She paused. Was the brace calibrated incorrectly on purpose? The silence went on long enough to be its own answer. Helena, there are complexities in your case that I'm going to stop you there, she said. I've asked my legal team to request your complete records on my case. All of them, including the calibration logs. The line was quiet. I'd cooperate with that request, she said, if I were you. She hung up and sat in her office for a long time, looking at the city, listening to the sound of her own breathing. What the calibration logs showed, when the attorneys got them, and when a forensic medical consultant reviewed them, was a pattern of incremental miscalibration beginning approximately 4.5 years earlier, shortly after Helena had rejected a merger offer that would have significantly benefited a private investment group in which Conrad Sloan held a quiet, undisclosed stake. A merger she had rejected. A merger that had subsequently failed without Caldwell Capital's participation. Not permanent disability, not medical inevitability. A brace, turned the wrong way, by someone who knew exactly what he was doing. The Maryland Medical Board suspended Sloan's license within 6 months of the complaint filing. The civil case took longer. Helena did not attend most of the hearings. She had other things to attend to. The first morning she put weight on her left leg, not standing, not walking, but the deliberate, effortful act of bearing weight on a limb she had been told would never cooperate again. She was in the rehabilitation gym at Hopkins with Dr. Warren and a physical therapist named Shonda, who had the patience of someone who had seen harder things than this and the directness of someone who would not pretend any of it was easy. Again, Shonda said. Helena pressed down, again. She pressed down again. Her legs shook. Her arms gripped the parallel bars until her knuckles were white. Good, Shonda said, not enthusiastically, just factually. Good. She sent Pete Decker a letter in March, not an email. A letter on Caldwell Capital letterhead, which probably seemed strange to him given that she could have found his phone number in about 45 seconds. But some things deserve the weight of paper. She thanked him. She told him what had happened, the summary of it, the parts that were no longer under legal seal. She told him that a plumber who showed up early and paid attention to a sound through a bathroom wall had done more for her than a decade of credentialed expertise. She told him Lucy's drawing sounded like something worth framing. He wrote back. On lined paper, in handwriting that leaned slightly to the right, the way left-handed people write when they've been taught to hold the pen with their right hand. He said he was glad she was okay. He said Lucy had in fact framed the drawing herself with a plastic frame from the dollar store that was slightly crooked, and it was hanging on the wall next to the refrigerator. He said if the pipes on 22 ever gave her trouble again, to call. 14 months after that first weight-bearing test in the Hopkins gym, Helena Marsh walked onto the stage of the Caldwell Capital Annual Conference in front of 200 investors, analysts, and staff. She walked with a cane. She walked slowly. She walked with the particular careful deliberateness of a person who knows the value of each step, because they have spent considerable time being told they would never take it. Nobody in the room said anything, not because they were indifferent, because for a moment no one could. The conference went on. Helena presented the portfolio performance. She answered questions with the same precision she had always brought to a room. The chair was not on the stage. It was in her office, available if she needed it, no longer a symbol of permanence. After the closing remarks, after the crowd had thinned, and the catering staff had begun folding the linen tablecloths, a woman came up to her, a junior analyst, 23 or 24, with the look of someone who had prepared a question and then lost her nerve and then recovered it. "How did you know?" the young woman asked. "How did you know who to trust when everyone else was saying the opposite?" Helena thought about that for a moment. She thought about a man in a gray work shirt with a notepad and a cracked mirror van and a daughter who drew athletes with large arms and small, determined faces. "I didn't trust expertise," she said. "I trusted someone who was paying attention." The young woman nodded, not entirely sure what to do with that. Helena picked up her cane and walked to the elevator. Outside, Baltimore was doing what Baltimore does in early spring. Undecided, damp, occasionally surprising. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment longer than was practical, just to stand on it. Then she got into the car that was waiting and went back to work.